You are listening to Insights from the Conference Board.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Yi. Welcome to Insights, a podcast series from the Conference Board's Human Capital Center. So why are organizations investing in talent mobility initiatives, and how can organizations build an effective talent mobility program? So to discuss these questions today, I'm sitting down with Robin Erickson, principal researcher, and Marian Devine, senior researcher. So both Robin and Marian are my colleagues from the Human Capital Center. Welcome to the show, Robin and Marian.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Amy.
So the three of us are co-authors of our Total Talent Mobility Report. The report was released in April this year. So the members of the conference board can access the report from our website. So our report focuses on the top 10 strategic purposes of talent mobility. We identify the common barriers organizations may encounter when implementing the talent mobility initiatives. We also included some best practices that companies can take to address those barriers and achieve their strategic purposes. So in today's podcast, we're not able to go over all the findings and examples, but we will highlight a few of the most important findings and research insights, and I hope you will find them interesting as well. So now let's get started. So Robin, before we dive into the specific findings, could you tell our audience why the conference board picked the talent mobility as the research focus, and why now?
Sure, Amy. Happy to share. Talent mobility is important because it can help address many retention, engagement, and attraction challenges that organizations have. And we hadn't written about talent mobility previously here at the Conference Board, and we wanted to find something that hadn't been written about. And so we did a number of interviews with some subject matter experts here at the Conference Board. And one of the things that kept coming up was that there are many different reasons why organizations should implement a talent mobility program. We also have found in this year's C-Suite Challenge, every year we do the C-Suite Challenge report, we found that two of the top three issues that keep CEOs awake at night revolve around talent. The first is around the attraction and retention of talent. And the third one was developing next generation leaders. And we believe that talent mobility is something that can help with these challenges. And in fact, when the CEOs were asked what they were going to do to invest in their talent, they said that they were going to invest in cross-functional rotation experiences for employees.
Thank you very much, Robin, for sharing the background information. It's really a global issue in terms of talent engagement retention. So would you be also able to share with us some of the overview of the research methodology?
Sure. We used a multi-method approach to collect the data. We did a literature review first. Then, as I mentioned, we spoke to subject matter experts. We then did a global online survey where we asked participants to rank their top strategic purposes of talent mobility, the primary barriers, and the overall effectiveness. We had 121 responses, 57% from the Americas, 25% from Asia, and 16% from Europe. So it is a global survey. We did have global responses. And we then, after the survey, interviewed 10 HR leaders from around the world in different organizations to find out what they're doing with talent mobility in their organizations. And then finally, we did 2 focus groups with different HR leaders to discuss the drivers and challenges and what HR can do to improve the entire process.
Thanks, Robin. So the next question I'm asking actually on behalf of the audience, for those of you who are listening, probably have noticed that there's a terminology difference in the program title, and we use total talent mobility for our research. So what exactly is total talent mobility, and how is it different from talent mobility in the traditional sense? Marian, would you be able to briefly explain?
Yes, Amy, I'd be delighted to. I think that, when you think of traditional, let's call it traditional talent mobility, I think most people would instantly think about, the talent program that you have to develop normally quite small cohorts of high potential employees or your future senior managers. And it's often very much, the assumption that it's sort of vertical advancement, that it's all about promotion, progression, and that it's a well-defined career path managed by the talent function. So that's kind of traditionally, I think, how companies have thought about talent mobility, upward and very much for just a small number of people. And often within that model, you also have companies talking about international mobility, which is international assignments. And this is seen kind of quite separately. And this again is used often to develop senior leaders, to broaden them, to give them, new experiences in different markets and geographies. And that might be managed quite separately by a global mobility team and the host organization. So that's kind of the talent mobility models that we all kind of are familiar with. But what we found in our research was that actually something different seems to be happening, and a different model seems to be emerging. And it's really, I think, because companies are just, company structures are flatter, they're less hierarchical, they're more networked, and there are new ways of working now that's very much multidiscipline, collaboration, small teams. So really this sort of, this talent model, this traditional approach doesn't really work so well as it used to, I think. So what we saw is what we're calling total talent mobility. And this is something that's much more of a holistic approach. And it is not just for a small, group of high flyers, but actually it's for everyone. It's for all employees who need to be moved around, developed, learn new skills, etc. And so it's an approach that involves moving employees into permanent or temporary new roles. It can be within the organization, but actually we're also seeing it across organizations and even industries. And this can be through, moving people perhaps for a while to a strategic alliance or a joint venture or with a key supplier, or moving them into different parts of the organizations that are very different, like an incubation hub or an innovation lab. And this model also entails global mobility. So when companies are thinking about the best way to move people, they can actually also think in terms of a sort of a holistic approach of moving them to different places. So this is, as I said, sort of something that is a bit more holistic, and it's driven both by the needs of the business, but also the aspirations and interests of employees. Because we know today that to keep hold of your talent, you really do need to listen to what they want and to personalize their career paths and their experiences. So we think total talent mobility sums all of that into what we think is a new model.
Thanks so much, Marianne, for sharing the new approach to the talent mobility. I'm sure that what you shared earlier regarding the current new way of working resonate with a lot of our audiences. So, Robin, what are the top 10 strategic purposes from our report? Could you give us a quick overview?
Sure, and it's not as easy to just read 10 things, so I'll try to make this as interesting as possible. But we did ask the folks in our online survey to rank order their top 5 strategic purposes, and so it was not a surprise to us or any of our interviewees or focus groups that the number one top strategic purpose was around developing high potentials and leadership succession planning. I think that is where organizations have traditionally focused their talent mobility efforts. So it was not a big surprise that it came out first. The second top strategic purpose was to build business leaders with broad, diverse experiences. And that's very close to the first one around developing high potentials and leadership succession planning. So it makes sense that that's also very high on the list. And as Marianne was mentioning about the new way of working and focus on talent, the third and fourth strategic purposes, the third is to enable skills and competency development fourth is around engaging and retaining talent. And I think that in our tight labor market, it's important for organizations to think about the loss of employees. We actually did some research and found that the average length of time an employee will stay in an organization in the U.S. is 4.2 years, according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. However, for younger workers from age 25 to 34, their average length of time to stay in an organization at 2.7 years. So definitely organizations should be thinking about how they can keep employees because, then they don't have to go through as much cost to replace them, and they don't have to, they know that they already know these employees. They're less of a risk than a new hire. That's the top four. The number 5 is to develop leaders to grow the business in new areas. And I think that is tied to the global mobility aspect of this in some cases, and then in other cases. So it might be new geographic areas, but it might be other areas that the organization is interested in growing. So number 6 is actually tied to global mobility, the idea of swiftly transferring skills and expertise across geographies. And so that is definitely high on the list of priorities for most organizations. And then we have some other interesting reasons for strategic purposes for talent mobility. And Marianne's actually going to walk us through a few of these later on. But 7, 8, and 9 are similar in that they have to do with this new world of work that Marianne had mentioned. But the number 7 is to foster collaboration and innovation. Number 8 is to build agility in leaders and the workforce. And number 9 is to ensure knowledge transfer and cross-pollination of ideas. And so I'll leave the commentary for Marianne coming up. But I did want to spend a little bit of time telling you about the number 10 strategic purpose. And I was actually really shocked to see that it was the last one here. And so number 10 is to decrease time to fill new roles. And the reason why I was shocked to see it there is because organizations can fill positions more quickly, especially more senior level positions, if they look internally, because the amount of interviewing that's needed is typically less. Especially if, as I was saying, the current employees have already been through your performance review process. They're not as high a risk. So I was surprised to see decreased time to fill new roles as low as it was, but I do think that it's a really important strategic purpose, and perhaps will become even higher if we were to do the same survey in a year, given our tight labor market conditions. So with that, I will stop telling you about the strategic purposes and turn it back over to Amy.
Thanks, Robin, for the quick overview on the 10 strategic purposes. I guess some of our audience is probably taking notes as you went through the 10 of them. So now I have a follow-up question. As you mentioned that it's probably not surprising for a lot of organizations or HR practitioners to see that developing high potentials in leadership succession planning and engagement and retaining talent are in the top 5 list. So do you think that organizations will see some challenges as they go about achieving their goals? And what are some suggestions that you could offer to help help organizations meet their objectives?
Sure, happy to address that. And just so everyone who's listening to this podcast knows, we did create a summary report that has these the top 10 strategic purposes, as well as the barriers and short descriptions of the best practices. So it's a 2-page handout that's available on our website. So you may want to look that up. I think it's a great, it's the sort of thing that you could put on your wall and have there as a reminder of all the different strategic purposes of talent mobility. In fact, one of the research studies that we read had said that talent mobility was the panacea for all talent woes. And I don't believe it is, but I think it definitely can help with a lot of them. So, but getting back to your question, Amy, around developing high potentials and leadership succession planning, Yes, we weren't surprised to see it at the top of the list, and we looked at the barriers. We found that in many organizations, leaders are unwilling to let high-performing talent move from their team, and so that's a really big issue. Our audience members are nodding their heads, but another word for this is sort of the idea of talent hoarding. The fact that in many organizations, business leaders, their numbers are based on profitability alone, not on the development of talent. And so whenever a business leader thinks about letting someone leave their team or go someplace else, they probably will take a financial hit to their metrics, and so that's just really hard. So, and so again, talent hoarding, it happens when managers think their individual metrics are more important than the overall success of the organization, or their top employees' desires to learn and grow. And in fact, one of the studies we found in our literature review said that half of the surveyed companies and 74% of the low-performing organizations admitted that talent hoarding was the leading obstacle to talent mobility. So, what do we think organizations can do for this issue? We had 3 best practices. One was to build talent mobility into high potential leadership development strategy. Many organizations have already done this, and if you haven't, it's definitely something to consider doing, because we actually found in another study here at the conference board that only 16% of organizations offer mobility opportunities, that is a task or a job rotation, as part of learning development plans. So that's definitely not a very high number, so that's definitely something that should be done immediately. The second best practice is around holding leaders accountable with incentives or performance expectations, and I like to call these the carrot or the stick approach. Definitely there should be the responsibility for each leader to record and report on the number of talent moves within their specific function. And, there should be either incentives in the form of, revised metrics or additional bonus for the leader, or there should be, performance expectations that if someone's not allowing people to move around, that's noted in their performance review. Because often what gets measured is most of the time what matters. Someone else said, what is measured is what's treasured. So definitely something to think about, making sure that you do. And then the third best practice is to close the pay gap between internal transfers and external hiring. And that is because typically, external hires are usually paid more than current employees. In fact, other research shows that external hires are initially paid 18% more than workers if they get a promotion. And employees who are motivated by money will leave an organization if they perceive external compensation, if they perceive they're being paid below market and that they're not making as much as their colleagues, or that they're not making as much as they could. So companies should regularly evaluate external compensation benchmarks and ensure equal pay before trying to match your high potentials with new opportunities. So that's developing high potentials in leadership succession planning. And then in terms of engaging and retaining talent, I mentioned that we have a tight labor market. With the unemployment rate in the U.S. at its lowest in almost 50 years, the voluntary turnover rate is very high. And so opportunities to learn and grow are extremely important to millennials, and all generations find developmental assignments very effective, especially when they're developing leadership skills. So barrier around engaging and retaining talent, that strategic purpose of talent mobility, is the difficulty of designing and implementing integrated end-to-end talent mobility processes. So we found in our research, in our survey, that most organizations aren't integrating their total talent mobility efforts with all of their HR functions. And so, for the people who are assigned to new jobs, the experiences before, during, and after the assignments are not always consistent. There's oftentimes there's not enough onboarding. There's no tracking. So there are definitely issues with the lack of workforce planning, inconsistent performance check-ins. And so what happens is that because of these negative experiences, often the people who transfer to new positions will leave afterwards. So there's high levels of voluntary turnover. So the 3 best practices that we suggest for this is that organizations should consider leveraging cloud and artificial intelligence-based tools. And many organizations are experimenting with these types of tools to support and keep track of assignees. There's the tool called Maya, which is a global mobility chatbot, enables everyone involved to share data from a single source. The second best practice is around providing dedicated HR support. And one of the companies that we interviewed said that they had created a talent brokerage team to support the employee mobility process and other talent-related activities. So this team is comprised of the talent and capability partners from all parts of HR that are aligned to different business functions, and their goal is to represent talent when it comes to development and to make sure that everyone knows that there is support for those folks. And then the third best practice is to define success early and provide continuous feedback. And this probably isn't a surprise, but there is a risk of failure when someone moves into a new position. And so it's important to define what success looks like and develop a process to track the results. At one of the companies we interviewed, the involved managers are offered guides and templates to help the assignees navigate and the talent move process, how to get from here to there. So it's also important to have a clear set of learning-based goals prior to any move. So those are our suggestions for those 2 strategic purposes. I'll turn it back over to you, Amy.
Great. Thanks, Robin, for the very specific suggestions. So, Marian, you just talked about the kind of the new world of work and also the new talent mobility model. So in today's changing business environment, I can totally see that like collaboration, innovation, agility are becoming increasingly important. So how do those areas relate to talent mobility? Are you able to briefly talk a bit more about those areas?
Yes, Amy, thank you. I mean, I think these 2 areas are just so interesting because I think across our member network, we see so many of our companies really being driven to compete through becoming, so much more innovative, and to be innovative, that needs collaboration. No single person or team has got the answer. It's all about, leveraging that knowledge and that expertise across the business. So, in terms of fostering collaboration and innovation, I think in a way that's where the importance of mobility is really apparent when it comes to, it's not just about moving your people internally. It's also about helping them to link with people outside the organization, linking with, real thought leaders, tapping into knowledge out there, tapping into the knowledge of suppliers or key alliance partners. And that's something I think that, talent mobility really helps companies when it comes to just dissolving those organizational boundaries that stop you being innovative and maybe keeps you in a silo that doesn't work today in the environment that companies find themselves. So total talent mobility is really important just to help employees gain exposure to new perspectives, to learn and develop, to build their networks. But, what is the sort of key barrier to that? Well, I think so many companies would just say culture. We understand it in principle, but actually the culture it's really hard to get a culture that supports that type of so much more, fluid way of thinking, the mindset that you need to be innovative and collaborative. And so you need, a culture where people are willing to move, where people are willing to be challenged, to think differently. You need managers who are willing to let their people go, but also maybe to take on risks of taking on people that they don't know or who come from very different backgrounds. And you may have a local culture that's not very conducive to innovation. Perhaps the culture just, doesn't particularly, for example, encourage speaking up, giving your views, arguing back, challenging the status quo. So those are all things that make culture a really, really big sort of factor in the area of collaboration and innovation. So what can companies do? Well, obviously they have to tackle, they have to sort of approach it from lots of different angles, but just actually embedding your talent mobility into your principles, your activities, really being explicit about the fact that you want people to move around, that you really do believe that being exposed to different experiences and perspectives is something that's absolutely vital for collaboration. So just saying it, and some of the companies that we came across have actually, really make it very, very clear that they support mobility, that they want people to move. And one company, for example, publishes sort of mobility principles, like, for example, saying that we want to publish all vacancies on our internally. We really want to encourage people to apply internally before we look externally. I think as well that something we see is especially when it comes to companies that are going through digital transformation, digitally immersive experiences, and that's something that came up in our C-suite challenge. Just that often the best way for people to learn, the best way for people to become more innovative is actually move them into places, like startups, innovative startups. Send them to some sort of innovation lab, send them to a university campus where there are lots of, specialized companies doing exciting things. So just really, really important to give people immersive experiences so that they can really experience it for themselves. And then, of course, just create programs to really help employees work in different parts of the organization or to different locations. And one of the examples we came across that I liked was a major airline in Oceania that invited employees from other firms in the same industry to work in its digital, finance, and HR departments, just for a short time, but just to share learning across the industry. And then we're seeing companies obviously offering secondments at innovation labs or fab labs, just to really stimulate employees for a short-term assignment and to just go totally away from their day-to-day workplace and to experience rapid innovation, to collaborate with external partners. And so again, an interesting example we came across was a global telecommunications firm that has piloted an entrepreneur studio for its French staff. And the successful applicants pitch their ideas before a cross-functional jury, and they have to gain sponsorship from a business unit, and then they work full-time in the project for between 6 and 18 months. And they have a budget, they have an entrepreneur coach, and they get help from specialists such as coders and designers. And that's gone down really well, and they're now piloting the studio with their European and African operations. So lots of sort of very exciting things, I think, going on in the area of collaboration and innovation linked to mobility, talent mobility. Building agility in leaders and teams. Well, our surveys revealed, and so has our C-suite challenge, that companies really want to become more agile. They really need to move people around in agile teams, to work very fluidly, to go to where the work is, to work in cross-functional teams on short assignments, and they're using agile methods and techniques to help them do that. And it's all about really helping people bring together their different functional expertise and experience onto a very specific customer-based projects or solutions and problems. So we're really sort of seeing that. And of course, talent mobility is absolutely vital. If you're going to have agile teams, this means that you're actually moving people around all the time onto different agile teams. They work in squads for a while. They're temporary. They could be lasting 2 weeks to several months. They're multidisciplinary. Often they're self-organizing. And so they're coalescing around a customer, via sprints, and they're using methods like rapid prototyping, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all about moving people and helping people to become very, very flexible and adaptable. So what's the primary barrier? Well, life gets really complicated. If you're a talent management person, how do you keep track of all these employees? How do you keep track of their skills, their wishes, the business needs, when all these projects are so rapid and varied? So a key barrier can be that companies just lack capability in HR technology and data analytics. They find it hard to keep track of talent flows, to maintain up-to-date, comprehensive performance management data, so people are getting all these new skills and new experiences. And, and of course, and they may lack just, that data may be all across the company. So what do you do? So for us, what we found was that companies are, as Robin mentioned, turning to technology-based platforms and really good data analytic tools to help match employees with internal opportunities. So something that we're seeing is that companies are starting to use these tools to give their employees the option, especially under the GDPR, to put in as much detail into sort of profiles about what they want, what their interests are, what their experiences are, even outside of work. And this sort of massive amount of data can be then used via an AI tool to match people with internal opportunities and also to maybe dovetail them with relevant training. So one company, for example, has an internal platform, an American global information technology company. Its internal platform also offers training for agile working via animated simulations, and this is built around a sort of series of personas to role model behaviour such as constructive criticism. We came across another bank that has a digital platform for its 200,000 employees who work in over 70 countries. And this acts like a sort of a transparent internal job market, and it provides access to every employee's profile. And if they want, employees can give, lots of very personal information about themselves. And the platform's linked to a tool that provides information about internal opportunities. And a bit like Netflix model, it pushes potentially suitable jobs to current employees. It might sort of say, so-and-so who has a similar profile to you has actually, moved into this job or has this career path. You might want to think about that. I think the other thing that we saw as a good practice was just, you need a taxonomy of teams. If you're going to scale up agile working and move people around, you do have to create taxonomies of teams so that you can actually work out what teams are out there, who's doing what, and how well they're doing them. And this will help you identify potential team members and the profiles of workers needed to staff them. Because, in the case of one US financial services company, they have at least 500 agile teams in 2018. It's an awful lot of teams to manage. So they've developed this taxonomy for their business units. So this allows their product line managers to assemble cross-functional teams with sort of minimal confusion and also minimize sort of redundancy or duplication across the teams. So those are some best practices that we think will really help companies to absolutely maximize the use of talent mobility to build agile organizations.
Yeah, very interesting company examples. Thank you so much, Marianne. And I hope this will give our audience some thoughts, new thoughts and ideas as they build their talent mobility programs. So I'd like to thank you, Robin and Marianne, again for joining me today to discuss total talent mobility. I'm sure our members will find the insights and best practices you just shared very relevant and helpful. So for our audience, if you like the content, please subscribe to this program. And we have a lot more podcasts on other human capital topics on the Conference Board website, which are also available via YouTube, Google, and Spotify. So I'm Amy Yee here with Robin Erickson and Marianne Devine, and thanks for listening to the Insights, a podcast series from the Conference Board's Human Capital Center.
This has been Insights from the Conference Board.